When it comes to fantasy, there are a few that manage to capture the hearts of an audience, and it's even rarer to find one that captures the stomachs and makes your mouth water at the sight of these delectable, flavoursome monsters. I never thought I would be craving a basilisk omelette or living armour soup. But that's what this show does. It finds a way to make something gross and weird and turn it into something fascinating and delightful. I didn't think we would get a better fantasy anime than Frieren, and out of nowhere this show comes out and proves to be equally as exciting. What makes it stand out is its unique premise. Delicious in Dungeon has one of the most defining features, and it's central to why it's considered peak fantasy. The anime subverts traditional fantasy expectations by placing food at the heart of its narrative. While most fantasy stories focus on epic battles, quests, or political intrigue, this series introduces an unusual but charming premise. What if instead of looting treasure or slaying monsters, adventurers focus on cooking and eating their way through the dungeon? This twist on the classic dungeon crawl immediately sets the series apart. The series taps into a primal connection between survival and food, emphasizing that in any adventure, sustenance is as crucial as combat skills. The characters in Delicious in Dungeon aren't just fighting to survive. This combination of gourmet cooking with the high stakes of adventure creates a unique tension and excitement that's rarely seen in fantasy. The protagonist Laios is not just a warrior but a food enthusiast, or should I say monster enthusiast. His enthusiasm for turning monsters into gourmet meals drives much of the narrative. The show doesn't just focus on whether the characters can defeat a monster, but also on how they can prepare it into something delicious. On a deeper level, the focus on food makes the fantastical world more relatable to the audience. Eating is a universal experience, and the joy of discovering new flavors or the comfort of a well-prepared meal resonates across cultures and ages. By grounding the high fantasy setting with something as tangible as food, the series bridges the gap between the mundane and the magical, making the fantasy world feel more alive and immersive. One of the most impressive aspects of Delicious in Dungeon is how it builds a living, breathing ecosystem within the dungeon. Monsters are not just obstacles or enemies, they are integral parts of the environment, each with a role to play in the dungeon's ecology. The series carefully details how these creatures function in their habitat, what they eat, and how they might be prepared as food. This approach adds a layer of depth to the world building, making the dungeon feel like a real place with its own logic and structure. Every creature encountered is meticulously designed with both its biological role and its culinary potential in mind. For example, a giant scorpion might have a tough exoskeleton that needs to be cracked open like a crab, with a slime might be transformed into a gelatinous dessert. This dual-purpose design enriches the storytelling, where the biology of the creatures directly influences how they are cooked and eaten. The series introduces a level of practicality often missed from traditional fantasy. In most fantasy worlds, food appears as an afterthought, a feast at the end of a battle or a tavern scene. Delicious in Dungeon flips this trope, integrating food into the core of the adventure. The characters have to forage, hunt, and use what's available, reflecting real-world survival tactics. This attention to the mundane aspects of adventuring, such as what to eat, adds realism to the fantasy, making the world more immersive and believable. The incorporation of survival elements into the story adds stakes that go beyond the typical win or die scenarios. The characters must be resourceful and think critically about how to use every part of the monsters they defeat. This not only adds tension but also shows how the adventurers adapt to their environment. It's not just about defeating a dragon, it's about turning that dragon into a sustainable food source for the journey ahead. The series elevates survival from mere subsistence to an art form, with each meal representing ingenuity and adaptation. Character development is a core strength of Delicious in Dungeon, as it balances the quirky premise with deep and meaningful growth for its cast. The series excels not just in crafting a compelling world, but also in creating a group of characters that feel genuine, relatable, and emotionally engaging. Delicious in Dungeon features a diverse cast, each bringing their own unique perspectives, skills, and motivations to the story. This diversity not only enriches the narrative but also allows the audience to connect with the characters on a personal level. The protagonist Laios is driven by a desire to rescue his sister Fallon, who was swallowed by a dragon. While he's a skilled fighter, his obsession with monster cuisine adds an endearing quirkiness to his character. Laios is driven by a mixture of guilt, love, and his peculiar fascination with food, making him a complex and relatable character. His optimistic and open-minded nature often helps the group see opportunities where others see danger, embodying the theme of finding joy even in dire circumstances. Marcel the elf mage represents the more traditional fantasy character archetype, but with a twist. She is cautious, intelligent, and skeptical about the idea of eating monsters, reflecting the viewpoint of a more conventional fantasy audience. Her initial reluctance to embrace the unconventional methods of survival is a central part of her character arc. As the series progresses, Marcel's gradual acceptance of the other's perspectives showcases her growth and highlights the theme of adapting to change. Chilchuck the halfling locksmith is pragmatic and street smart, providing a counterbalance to the idealism of Laius and the cautiousness of Marcel. His motivations are more grounded in practicality. He's in it for the money, but his loyalty to the group deepens over time. Chilchuck's no-nonsense attitude and experience in dungeon mechanics often make him the voice of reason, but his growing attachment to the group reveals a softer side that adds depth to his character. The dwarf warrior Senshi is the heart of the culinary aspect of the series. His experience in cooking monsters not only provides practical survival skills, but also introduces a philosophical perspective on respecting the natural order of the dungeon. Senshi's calm demeanor, wisdom, and deep connection to nature add a layer of spirituality to the story, balancing the more frantic energy of the younger characters. His role as a mentor figure helps the group bond over shared meals, turning necessity into tradition. The characters are constantly challenged by the dungeon and by each other. These challenges force them to confront their fears, biases, and personal weaknesses, leading to significant growth over the course of the series. Initially horrified by the idea of eating monsters, Marcel's character arc is one of the most poignant. Her evolution from a squeamish mage to someone who appreciates the necessity and even artistry of monster cuisine mirrors the broader theme of overcoming prejudice and embracing new perspectives. Her growth is not just about accepting different culinary practices, but also about learning to trust her companions and adapt to their unconventional methods. Laius begins the series as a somewhat naive leader driven more by his passions than by strategy. However, his experiences in the dungeon, particularly those involving life-threatening situations, force him to become more responsible and thoughtful. His growth is seen in how he learns to balance his culinary obsession with the safety and well-being of his friends. Laius' leadership evolves from being driven by personal interests to a more mature, selfless concern for his group. The heart of Delicious in Dungeon lies in the interactions between its characters. The group dynamics are rich and layered, driven by the necessity of survival but deepened by shared experiences, trust, and humor. The series is filled with humor, much of which stems from the characters' contrasting personalities and their reactions to the bizarre situations they encounter. Laius' enthusiasm for monster cuisine often clashes with Marcel's initial revulsion, leading to comedic moments that also serve as character development. Chilchuck's dry wit and Senshi's stoic wisdom adds further layers to the group's interactions, making their dialogues lively and engaging. As the characters face increasingly dangerous monsters and treacherous environments, their reliance on each other grows. The necessity of cooperation to survive in the dungeon leads to deeper bonds and a mutual understanding that transcends their initial differences. This is particularly evident in moments where they must trust one another with their lives, such as when navigating deadly traps or devising a strategy to defeat a formidable foe. Over time, their teamwork becomes seamless, reflecting the deep trust they have developed. Shared experiences in the dungeon not only forge practical bonds but also lead to an emotional growth. The act of cooking and eating together becomes a ritual that solidifies their camaraderie, transforming the dungeon from a place of danger into a home of sorts. The group's meals, often centered around monster dishes, serve as a moment of respite and reflection. These meals become symbolic of their unity and adaptability. Each character brings something to the table, whether it's Senshi's cooking skills, Marcel's magical enhancements, or Laius' adventurous palate. These moments also provide opportunities for the characters to share their personal stories, fears, and hopes, deepening their connection to one another. The characters are not just adventurers but also individuals with their own emotional baggage. For instance, Laius struggles with guilt over his sister's fate, while Marcel fears losing her friends due to the dangers of the dungeon. These emotional struggles are explored and resolved through their interactions, showing how the group becomes a support system for each other. Vulnerability is allowed within the group, making their bonds feel authentic and earned. Delicious in Dungeon has made a significant impact on the fantasy genre, particularly within anime and manga, by introducing a unique blend of cooking and adventure that has inspired similar works and garnered universal acclaim. By adding a culinary twist to a well-worn genre, Delicious in Dungeon has breathed new life into fantasy storytelling. It offers a fresh perspective on traditional fantasy elements like monsters, magic, and dungeons, encouraging other creators to think outside the box and experiment with genre conventions. The series' focus on the ecosystem of the dungeon and the natural cycle of life within it has encouraged other creators to think more holistically about their fantasy worlds. Rather than just presenting monsters as obstacles, Delicious in Dungeon treats them as part of a living, breathing world with each creature serving a role in the dungeon's ecology. This approach to world building has inspired similar attention to detail in other fantasy works, where environments feel more immersive and interconnected. The impact of Delicious in Dungeon on the fantasy genre cannot be overstated. By blending the familiar with the unexpected, the series has opened up new possibilities for storytelling within fantasy, inspiring other creators to explore unconventional themes and approaches. Its critical acclaim and strong fanbase has solidified its place as a landmark work in both anime and manga. As a series that challenges genre conventions while maintaining a deep emotional core, Delicious in Dungeon has truly earned its status as a peak fantasy, influencing not just how fantasy worlds are built, but also how stories are told within them.